Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where emotions whisper through luxury, and love finds meaning in the most unexpected places. Today we unfold a story not of wealth or power, but of a heart that learns what it truly means to love. Let's step into the world of the billionaire's contract bride who taught him what love really means. The city pulsed beneath the glass towers, glowing with gold and greed. In the highest suite of the Vance Empire headquarters, Alexander Vance sat behind his obsidian desk, cold, composed, and perfect. At only 32, he was a billionaire who built his empire from ashes. Every magazine called him the man who never missed a deal. But beneath the tailored suits and diamond cufflinks was a man at war with his own heart. Alexander didn't believe in love. He believed in control, in numbers, contracts, and signatures that never lied. Love was chaos. Love was risk, and he didn't take risks. Not anymore. Yet fate had its own negotiations to make. One evening, during a board meeting lit by champagne and ambition, his senior advisor dropped a bombshell. "The investors are concerned about your image, Alexander. They want stability, a family man. Without that, the merger with Aveling Global won't go through." Silence. The word family was almost foreign in his marble world, but he never allowed emotions to dictate terms. He simply asked, "How long do I have?" 3 months. Alexander leaned back, eyes reflecting the city lights like shards of ice. "Then find me a bride." On contract. Days later, his assistant presented a file, slim, simple, and unassuming. Her name was Alara Hayes, a freelance art restorer, financially struggling, soft-spoken yet fiercely independent. No scandals, no family wealth, no hidden agendas. Just a woman whose eyes, in the small photograph attached, seemed to hold galaxies of stories. Alexander read through her file like another business proposal. But for reasons he couldn't explain, his hand paused over her picture. There was something in her expression, gentle but unyielding, that made him hesitate before signing the arrangement. He brushed the thought aside. Emotions had no place in transactions. When they finally met, it wasn't in a restaurant or an office, but in an art gallery. Alara was there, wearing a modest cream dress dusted with paint smudges, standing before a canvas that captured winter light with breathtaking delicacy. He approached, his presence commanding yet strangely uncertain. "You're Miss Hayes," he said, his tone firm, as if confirming an acquisition. She turned, eyes calm but unreadable. "And you're the man who thinks love can be written into a contract." Her voice was soft, but it cut through his walls like silk through glass. He handed her a file, polished and bound. 1 year. Public marriage. You'll receive compensation, housing, and financial stability. In return, you'll play the part of my wife until the merger concludes. After that, you're free. She didn't open the file immediately. Instead, she asked quietly, "And what do I get that's not written in this contract?" He didn't answer. Because he didn't know. That night, Alara sat alone in her tiny apartment, staring at the contract under the flicker of dim light. Her mother's hospital bills lay scattered on the table, a cruel reminder of reality. She'd always dreamed of love, of art, of freedom, not deals, not signatures, but sometimes survival demanded surrender. She signed. Their wedding was the event of the year, flawless and cold, a ceremony of marble roses, chandeliers dripping with light, and vows spoken without meaning. The media called it a union of power and grace. But behind the camera flashes, there was no warmth. Alexander stood tall beside her, every move precise, every smile rehearsed. Alara's hand rested on his arm, trembling not from fear, but from the realization that she had sold a part of her soul to a stranger. The mansion she moved into felt like a palace built of glass, beautiful, but suffocating. Every corridor echoed with silence. Servants moved like shadows. Alexander treated her with impeccable civility, never cruel, never kind, simply distant. They dined at opposite ends of a long mahogany table, where conversations were replaced by the quiet clinking of silver cutlery. But love, no matter how repressed, has its own way of sneaking through cracks. On her first night, Alara left a single sketch on his desk, a portrait of him not as the billionaire the world saw, but as a lonely man surrounded by glass walls. She didn't sign it. She didn't explain. She just left it there and walked away. The next morning, when Alexander found it, something inside him shifted, ever so slightly. He stared at the drawing for a long time, tracing the soft lines that somehow captured the man he had forgotten to be. And for the first time in years, Alexander Vance didn't know what to do. He had entered the contract to protect his empire. But now, a woman he barely knew was about to teach him that love was never a deal to be signed. It was a story to be lived. The mansion stood like a monument to perfection, marble pillars rising beneath chandeliers of crushed crystal, windows reflecting the skyline's golden glow. Yet, within those walls, silence lived like a ghost. Elora had entered Alexander's world, not as a bride, but as a guest in a house that didn't believe in warmth. Every corner whispered rules, every step echoed distance. The servants bowed politely but avoided her eyes, and the man she had married, her husband in name alone, carried himself like a shadow carved from steel. At the long dining table, they sat opposite each other every night. Between them lay silverware polished to perfection, dishes crafted by chefs flown in from France, and a silence so dense it could suffocate a dream. Alexander would glance at his phone between bites, checking figures and markets, while Elora quietly stirred her soup. They shared nothing but air, cold, conditioned, and impersonal. But there was one thing she noticed, hidden beneath his composure: loneliness. It lingered in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. A loneliness so sharp it mirrored her own. The days passed like elegant routines. She attended charity dinners by his side, smiled for cameras, and learned how to play her role, the perfect billionaire's wife. Yet behind closed doors, she returned to her art, the only thing that felt alive in her gilded cage. Each night, when the mansion fell silent, she would sit by the wide windows overlooking the city, painting under the soft hum of midnight. Her fingers danced across the canvas, painting not what she saw, but what she felt: loneliness, beauty, hidden pain, and somehow him. One morning Alexander walked into his study and froze. A sketch lay upon his desk, delicate, haunting, and entirely captivating. It was of his office, drawn in muted tones, but through the window of the sketch, sunlight streamed, the one thing missing from his real room. He frowned, unsure why it affected him. When he asked his staff who had left it there, everyone remained silent. But he knew. That night, he watched her quietly from the hallway as she painted by the window, her hair falling freely, her white silk robe flowing like moonlight. There was something achingly pure about the sight, a serenity his world of contracts could never offer. He didn't speak. He simply stood there for a moment, realizing that in this vast mansion filled with art he'd bought, she was the only masterpiece he could never own. Weeks passed, and a strange rhythm began to form between them. He began to linger longer at the breakfast table. Sometimes their eyes would meet, and though words failed, something wordless bloomed. One evening, as they prepared for yet another gala, Alexander's tie refused to sit straight. For the first time, Elora stepped forward, her touch soft and careful as she adjusted it. The moment her fingers brushed his collar, he felt it, a pulse, a warmth, something raw and unfamiliar. Their eyes met, and for the briefest second, the billionaire who ruled empires forgot how to breathe. Yet emotions were dangerous in Alexander's world. He buried the feeling, convincing himself it was nothing but gratitude. He continued treating her with respect, polite, distant, controlled. But inside, his carefully built walls began to tremble. He started noticing the little things: how she smiled at the housekeeper, how she hummed when she painted, how she filled empty rooms with life without even trying. She didn't need diamonds or fame, she carried grace in her silence. And that, more than beauty, terrified him. One night, after a long day of business chaos, he came home later than usual. The mansion was dark except for one light, her art room. He pushed the door open and found her asleep on the couch, brushes scattered, a half-finished painting glimmering under the lamp. It was a portrait of him, but not as the world saw him. In the painting, he wasn't the billionaire with a cold stare. He looked softer, gentler, almost human. Alexander's throat tightened. He stepped closer, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You see too much," he whispered to the sleeping figure, his voice low, almost broken. He covered her with a blanket, stood there for a moment longer, then quietly left, carrying with him a piece of the peace he never knew he needed. In the weeks that followed, something began to change between them. Their conversations grew longer, their silences warmer. He began taking his meetings from home, claiming convenience, though deep down he simply wanted to be near her. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the windows, he found her in the garden, barefoot, laughing as the rain began to fall. Without thinking, he joined her, his expensive suit soaked, his hair dripping, his laughter breaking through years of restraint. For that fleeting moment, the billionaire and his contract bride were just two souls. No deals, no expectations, just the quiet magic of shared existence. And though Alexander would never admit it aloud, he found himself waiting for her laughter each day. It became his favorite sound, the only melody that could soften the silence in his golden cage. He was still the man who didn't believe in love. But love had already found its way in, not through grand gestures, but through quiet moments, unspoken glances, and the gentle defiance of a woman who dared to see the man beneath the empire. In the mansion built of marble and glass, she was the first warmth he'd ever known, and though neither of them dared to say it, the silence between them was slowly turning into something beautiful. Something dangerously close to love. The winter rain came softly that night, wrapping the mansion in a hush of silver mist. The city lights blurred beyond the tall windows, and inside, Alexander Vance sat in his study, staring blankly at the flickering fireplace. The world saw him as untouchable, a man made of iron and intellect, but tonight even iron felt fragile. Across the hall he could hear faint music, the delicate hum of a piano. It was Alara. Her fingers danced across the keys, untrained yet mesmerizing, as if she were trying to speak to the silence itself. Each note was tender, uncertain, and heartbreakingly human. For weeks, Alexander had been pretending not to notice her presence seeping into his life. She didn't demand his attention, yet somehow she owned it. She filled the mansion with something money could never buy. Soul. One evening as thunder rolled across the city, Alexander returned home to find the art room door ajar. Inside, Alara sat by the window, clutching a letter. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. When he stepped closer, he saw tears glisten on her cheeks, the first he had ever seen from her. "Alara," he said, his voice lower than usual, unsure if it was concern or curiosity that drove him. She looked up, startled, and quickly wiped her tears. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady. He frowned, his instinct to command clashing with the ache in his chest. "You're not." Her gaze dropped to the letter again. "It's from the hospital," she said softly. "My mother, her condition's getting worse. The treatments are expensive and She stopped, realizing she didn't owe him an explanation. "It doesn't matter. You've already done enough." For a moment, Alexander was silent. This woman, who lived under his roof, who had agreed to a contract for money, was refusing to ask for help. She had dignity, pride, something he had lost long ago. He wanted to fix it, to write a check, make a call, end her pain with the swipe of his signature. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw something that stopped him. She didn't need saving. She needed understanding. So, for the first time in his life, Alexander didn't speak in deals or figures. He simply said, "I'm sorry," 2 words, unrehearsed, real. Alara blinked in surprise. In his voice she heard something she never expected, humanity. That night changed something between them. He began to see her differently, not as a contract, not as a responsibility, but as a heartbeat echoing in his cold world. He started noticing the softness of her presence, the way she tucked a flower into a vase every morning, the way she hummed when she cooked, how her laughter made the walls feel alive again. And she, in turn, began to see him, not as the ruthless billionaire the world feared, but as a man who had forgotten how to be loved. One evening, as snow blanketed the city, they found themselves sitting together by the fire, an accident of timing that neither moved to correct. Alara was sketching quietly. Alexander watched her, pretending to read. After a while he asked, "Why do you always draw me?" She smiled faintly. "Because I'm trying to find the real you. The one you hide behind those glass eyes." He chuckled, low and surprised. "You think there's a real me under all this?" Her gaze lifted to his. "I know there is." The air thickened. A quiet tension filled with something unspoken. His hand brushed against hers as he reached for his glass, and in that small, unguarded touch their worlds collided. Electricity, warmth, recognition. Neither of them spoke. But in that silence, hearts whispered what words never could. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation became undeniable. Alexander began joining her during breakfast, sometimes even cooking with her. Awkwardly, hilariously, as if trying to remember how ordinary life worked. He found himself laughing again, not the polite, strategic laugh he used in meetings, but something raw, from deep within. Alara had become the quiet revolution in his life. She didn't fight his darkness, she illuminated it. But as love began to blossom, fear followed close behind. Alexander had built his empire on control, and now he was losing it, to her smile, her silence, her mere presence. He couldn't understand it, and it terrified him. One evening, standing by his office window, he whispered to himself, "She's not supposed to matter." but the truth was simple, she did. More than he'd ever allow himself to admit. When the first snow of December fell, he took her to the rooftop garden, a place no one else had ever seen. The city sparkled beneath them, and for once Alexander didn't think about deals or deadlines. "I've been told love makes a man weak," he said quietly. Elora looked up at him, snowflakes melting on her lashes. "No, Alexander. Love doesn't make you weak. It reminds you that you're human." He stared at her. The woman who had entered his life through a contract, now rewriting the very definition of his world. In that moment, beneath the falling snow, he realized. He didn't just want her near him. He needed her. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or promises. It seeps quietly into your life. Through kindness, through patience, through eyes that see you when no one else dares to look. That was the moment Alexander Vance began to awaken, not as a billionaire, but as a man learning how to feel. The first light of dawn broke across the skyline, spilling gold through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vance mansion. But inside, the air was heavy, too still, too fragile. The warmth that had begun to bloom between Alexander and Elora was now shadowed by something unspoken. The end of the contract was approaching. Days had turned into months, and the one-year deal that once felt endless was nearing its final page. Yet, neither of them mentioned it. They lived in the delicate lie of the present, clinging to quiet breakfasts, shared laughter, and evenings spent beneath the same soft light. But fate has a cruel way of reminding hearts of what they try to forget. One afternoon, during a board meeting, a murmur spread through the glass halls of Vance Enterprises. A journalist had leaked something. An anonymous source had revealed that Alexander Vance's marriage was a sham, a contracted arrangement meant to secure a merger deal. By evening, every major outlet had the story. Headlines blazed: Billionaire's Fairytale marriage built on lies. Elora Hayes, the paid bride. The media tore her apart. Paparazzi camped outside the mansion. Cameras flashed through the gates. Every network dissected her photos, calling her manipulative, a gold digger, a woman who had bought love instead of earning it. And Alexander, the man she had grown to trust, to feel for, remained silent. Elora stood before the mirror that night, tears staining the same face that once smiled in his arms. She had never asked for fame, never sought his fortune, only peace, only dignity. But now, the world had turned her into a spectacle. When Alexander entered their room, she looked at him, not with anger, but with heartbreak. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Did you know this could happen?" He hesitated, a second too long. Silence fell heavy between them, and in that silence, her world shattered. "You could have stopped this," she said, her voice trembling. "You could have told them it wasn't like that, that I'm not just some contract." Alexander stepped forward. "Elora, I'll fix this. I'll call my lawyers." "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "That's what you always do, isn't it? Fix things with money. But not everything can be bought, Alexander. Not love, not trust." Her words struck him deeper than any loss he had ever known. The next morning, she was gone. Her wardrobe, her paintings, her laughter, all vanished. She left only a single envelope on his desk. Inside was the torn contract, and a small note written in her elegant hand. "I entered your world with a signature. I leave it with my heart broken, but free. You taught me that love cannot be signed. It must be felt. And I hope one day you'll feel it too." For the first time, Alexander Vance, the man who commanded the world, stood powerless. Days blurred into nights. The mansion that once echoed with her laughter now felt like a mausoleum. He couldn't focus. Meetings went unattended. Deals fell apart. His advisors urged him to speak publicly, to clear his name. But he refused. He didn't care about the company anymore. He cared about her. He drove through the city searching for her. To the art galleries she used to visit, the cafes where she painted, the quiet park bench where she once said she found peace. But she was gone, as if the universe itself had hidden her from him. And in her absence, he finally understood what she had given him. It wasn't her beauty. It wasn't her companionship. It was her ability to see him, to make him human again. Now, without her, he was hollow, a man surrounded by glass and gold, drowning in silence. Weeks later, he stood in his office, looking at the skyline that once symbolized power. His reflection stared back, tired, haunted, broken. On his desk still lay one of her sketches, the one she'd drawn of him smiling. He whispered, almost to himself, "I never deserved you." And for the first time in his life, Alexander Vance, the man who never cried, did. Tears slipped down his face, not for the empire he was losing, but for the woman who had taught him what it meant to feel. He called off the merger, sold half his shares, donated to the hospital where her mother was once treated, anonymously, and then, quietly, he disappeared from the business world. For months no one saw him. Rumors spread that he had left the city, moved abroad, or lost everything. But the truth was simpler. Alexander had finally realized that all his success meant nothing without the one woman who had made his heart beat again. When love is built on paper, it burns easily. But when love is built on truth, it survives even the ashes. Alexander lost everything, his name, his empire, his pride. But in that loss, he found something priceless. A heart unchained. The world moved on, but he didn't. Every sunset reminded him of her. Every quiet night felt like her absence breathing beside him. He thought of her laughter, her stubborn grace, her ability to turn his cold world warm. And he knew, deep within his soul, that his life was now divided in two, before Alara and after. Sometimes love must break to be reborn. And sometimes, losing the one you love isn't the end. It's the beginning of the man you were meant to become. Winter melted into spring, and with it, Alexander Vance vanished from the world he once ruled. His name, once whispered with reverence across boardrooms and business columns, faded into the background noise of new headlines. The empire he'd built was now in the hands of others. But for the first time, he didn't care. He had spent months wandering from city to city, no entourage, no press, no chauffeur. He traveled quietly, through crowded train stations, down narrow cobbled streets, through art markets where strangers smiled freely. He was learning how to be human again. And everywhere he went, he carried her memory. Ilara's laughter followed him like sunlight. Her sketches haunted him like music. Every face in a crowd reminded him of her in some small, impossible way. A tilt of a head, a softness of voice, a trace of grace. He realized that while he once measured his worth in billions, his true wealth had always been her. It was in Paris, months later, that fate led him back to her. He was walking past a small art gallery on Rue des Boucs, Arts, when he saw a familiar name on the window. Elara Hayes. Exhibition. Echoes of the Soul. His breath caught. The lights from the gallery spilled like gold across the cobblestones, warm and inviting. People moved gracefully inside, admiring the paintings. He stepped in, cautiously, like a man entering a dream he'd never thought he'd revisit. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and oil paint. On every wall hung her soul, captured in color, emotion, and silence. There were portraits of rain, of solitude, of gentle smiles beneath sorrow. But one painting stopped him cold. It was him. Not the man the world once knew, not Alexander the billionaire, not the empire builder. No, it was him as she had seen him, vulnerable, human, eyes filled with longing. The background shimmered with soft gold, as though she had painted not the man, but the hope she still carried for him. He stood before it for a long moment, his heart heavy with memories and unspoken words. And then, as if the universe had waited for this moment, he heard her voice. "I wondered if you'd come." He turned. Alara stood a few feet away, wearing a simple ivory dress that seemed to glow under the gallery lights. She looked radiant, softer, stronger, untouched by the storms of their past. Her eyes held the same depth he remembered. But now there was calm within them. "Alara," he whispered, her name breaking in his throat like prayer and apology all at once. She gave a small smile. "You disappeared." "I had to," he said, stepping closer. "I built a world that had everything, except peace. When you left, I realized peace was you." Her breath caught, the air between them trembling with the weight of everything unsaid. He looked around at the paintings. "You turned pain into beauty." She met his gaze steadily. "Pain teaches us who we are. I just painted what you taught me. That love isn't about possession. It's about presence." He smiled faintly. "And yet, I still want you to know I'm not here to own you, Alara. I'm here because I finally understand love, because you taught me how." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the torn contract she had left behind months ago. Only now, it was framed, sealed in glass. "I kept it," he said softly, "to remind me of the man I never want to be again." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Alexander, no contracts this time," he whispered, taking her hands. "No promises written in ink. Just one vow spoken, not signed." He took a breath, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I vow to love you without walls, without rules, without fear. I vow to stand beside you, not as a man who owns, but as one who finally understands what it means to give. I vow to never let silence speak where my heart should. The gallery fell silent around them, guests watching quietly, moved by the unguarded truth between two souls. Elara's tears fell freely, but her smile was radiant. "And I," she whispered, "vow to believe you. To love the man you are now, not the one you were." In that moment, the world seemed to still. The air shimmered between them, the kind of stillness that only love creates, the calm after every storm. He leaned in, their foreheads touching, the scent of her hair filling the space between breaths. It wasn't a kiss of passion, it was a promise of peace. Around them, the gallery lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of her painting, his portrait, shining like a witness to their rebirth. That night, under the Parisian moon, they walked along the Seine hand in hand. No cameras, no diamonds, no contracts. Just two souls finally free. He stopped midway across the bridge, turning to her. "Do you ever think," he asked, "that some people are meant to find each other, no matter how far they run?" She smiled softly. "Yes," she said, "because love isn't found. It's remembered." And as the night wind swept through the city, carrying the echoes of laughter, the billionaire who once built empires finally realized this was the only empire that mattered. In the end, he lost everything the world called valuable, and found the one thing it could never give: a love without conditions, a promise without signatures, a forever written not on paper, but in the heart. Because real vows aren't made at the altar. They're made in the quiet moments, when two broken souls choose to stay, to forgive, and to love again. In the end, it wasn't the mansion that stood as their legacy, nor the empire Alexander built with his brilliance and pride. It was the quiet moments, the ones that could never be written into a contract or measured by wealth, that told the real story of their love. When Elara had first entered his life, she was a signature on a page, a condition, a solution to a corporate demand. But when she walked out, she became the silence that echoed louder than his entire fortune. Alexander Vance had everything the world could offer, but nothing the soul could feel, until her. She had come into his life not to be owned, but to awaken him. And when she left, she didn't break him, she freed him. In chasing her absence, he found his own truth. He learned that love was not about control, but surrender. It was not about perfection, but presence. It was not about contracts, but connection. When they met again, not in his marble office but in her sunlit art gallery, he saw himself reflected through her eyes, not as the billionaire the world praised, but as the man she believed he could be. And in that sacred moment, when he tore apart the last symbol of their contract and vowed instead with his heart, he understood something he had never believed possible, that love cannot be bought, negotiated, or owned. It can only be given. Elara's art became his salvation, each painting a reminder of her courage, her tenderness, her unbreakable grace. And together, they rebuilt something that no business, no paper, no contract could define. A life made of laughter, warmth, and endless second chances. They didn't need a wedding eyes aligned with diamonds this time, only the soft rhythm of their footsteps along the Seine, hand in hand, hearts unguarded. He no longer introduced her as Mrs. Vance, but simply, "Elara, the woman who taught me what love really means." And she, smiling softly, would answer, "And you." The man who finally listened. In a world obsessed with wealth and power, their story became a quiet reminder that true richness isn't counted in billions, but in heartbeats. That the most powerful contracts are not written on paper, but on the soul. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories are not about how people meet, but about how they find their way back.